Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Welcome to a brand new video. So a little while ago, someone suggested in my comment section that I should do a birth story for both of my boys' labours and births, which I think is an amazing idea. Obviously, I have Avery's birth, the labour and birth story here on my channel already. I will link that one down below if you haven't seen it. But I've never done a birth story for Zach or for Eli. So I thought, particularly for December when everything is so busy anyway, these would be nice filler videos to film where I can just sit down and chat with you guys. So I'm going to start with Zach's birth story, and if you are new to my channel, Zach was my firstborn and he's currently 10, so we're going back quite a bit now, and I'm going to do my best to remember as much as possible. Now, if you'd have asked me the day after Zach was born how my labour was with him and how the birth was, I would have told you it was horrific. Now, looking back, having given birth to 2 more babies since then and seeing countless episodes of One Born Every Minute, actually his birth was pretty straightforward and pretty easy. So I was actually 19 when I gave birth to Zach. I was very young and I was actually living with my mum and dad at the time, and the day before I went into labour, so this was actually the day before my due date, my mum said to me we should go for a walk and see if we can bring on labour. I mean, there's so many myths, isn't there, on how you can bring on labour, but walking seemed to be a nice place to start. I wasn't overdue yet. Technically, I was still a day before my due date. Zach was due on the 5th of June 2013. That evening when she'd finished work, we actually took a walk to, well, we didn't take a walk, we took a drive to the beach. Now that doesn't seem like much, but to get onto the beach you had to go down quite hefty steep steps, and there was quite a lot of them. So we tackled them steps, we walked all the way to the shore, we sat at the little cafe that they had on the beach and had a drink, and then we walked all the way back up them steep steps, which was probably the challenge. Now, I was massive at this point. I was 9 months pregnant and I had put on a lot of weight. I don't know if it's just something about your first pregnancy that you just feel as though you can eat whatever you want. I learned in pregnancies after that you really shouldn't, because it took me a really long time to lose the baby weight, but I'm getting ahead of myself. I was big, I was heavy, and it was really difficult. And that evening I actually started to have some tightenings, and I remember telling my mum what was going on, and she thought then that it may be the start of something. It wasn't painful, I could just feel my entire belly tightening up. Now, I probably had experienced those tightenings throughout my pregnancy as Braxton Hicks, but this was the first time that I'd really paid attention to them, probably because I knew I was so close. Nothing else happened that evening. I went to bed, and the next morning I woke up at about 6:30. My mum and dad had already left for work, and I started to feel these tightenings again, but they felt maybe ever so slightly uncomfortable. I definitely wouldn't say they were painful, but they were just a little bit more obvious. And I laid in bed for a little while and I noticed that there was actually a bit of a pattern to them. They were coming maybe every sort of 10 to 15 minutes or so. So I decided to contact my mum. I told her I thought it was happening, and she wasn't going to be home until about lunchtime, and even then she was still leaving work early, so she had planned to come home at lunchtime. Zach was my first baby, it was my first labour. We pretty much figured it was going to take ages anyway, and that kind of was the case. So I carried on having these tightenings throughout the morning, and I remember I was doing some bits and bobs around the house. I was cleaning, hoovering, and I'd noticed that when I had bent down to clean the bottom of the fridge, it actually brought one on. So from then on I just carried on doing squats around the house, thinking that I was bringing them on, and it did kind of work. And this kind of persisted throughout most of the day. At around 6 o'clock in the evening, I was still getting these tightenings, and they were getting a little bit more uncomfortable. And my mum was actually going to Slimming World at that time, and I remember she had a meeting that night and we actually went. I was trying to carry on as normal, but then I also kind of had in the back of my mind that the likelihood was it was going to happen. So as far as I was aware, I was going into labour, and that is what I thought. So we went to this Slimming World meeting, and there were so many people asking me like how far along I was, how long I had left to go, and I'm not gonna lie, I felt incredibly smug being able to say, well, actually I think I'm going into labour now, because it had been a long 9 months. But after we had gone to Slimming World, we then went to the shop and we picked up a load of snacks. Again, under the impression that we were going to end up in hospital, we decided to get a little bit of food in that we could pack and take with us. My mum's this kind of person that if we're going anywhere, she'll pack some sandwiches for the road. So we did that. We got home, and by this point the tightenings, the contractions, were a little bit more uncomfortable. They were a little bit more regular. I can't remember exactly how often they were coming at that point, but we called the birthing centre because my preference was to deliver Zach in a birthing centre. So where we live, I had 3 options really. I had hospital, birthing centre and home, and I was set on having a water birth, a pool birth, and that is where it was, at the birthing centre. At that point there wasn't a pool at my hospital. There is now, but when I was having Zach there wasn't. So we made our way to the birthing centre. We arrived there and the midwife checked me and I was around 3 centimetres. So it was positive in that what I'd been feeling all day definitely was labour, but in the same sense I was kind of disheartened, and I think anyone that has had a slow first stage of labour can kind of understand that a little bit. You do get a little bit disheartened when you feel as though you've been contracting all day and you're really nowhere near. Now we had the option to go home at this point, but because it had taken us half an hour to get there, what I didn't want to happen is get home and then pretty much have to go again. I just kind of wanted to settle in one place, so they let us stay. We went for a little walk around the birthing centre just to try and keep me moving. They also had this kind of, it was like a lounge slash waiting area, so we sat in there for a little bit as well, and Mum cracked out the sandwiches and the crisps, which I regret eating. I regret stuffing my face, and I'm sure you can imagine why. There really is no dignity to labour and childbirth. So we did that, and by this point it was kind of pushing midnight and I was getting really tired, but the contractions were quite uncomfortable. So the midwife offered to give me a shot of pethidine just to see if it would help me sleep. So that is what she did. She gave me a shot of pethidine, and my mum, bless her, tried to have a little kip in the chair next to me, and I remember I did fall to sleep a little bit, but the contractions were so painful to the point where they were waking me up. So I'd lie there for a little while, doze off to sleep, and then I'd end up in pain, tossing and turning and waking up. So I didn't really get much rest. Then I needed a wee. So I got up to go to the toilet, and as I was coming back out I had another contraction, but this one felt a little bit different. It almost felt either like a really long contraction or like 2 contractions back to back, and right in the middle of them I felt a pop and a tiny little bit of something came out. Now, like I said, I'd binge watched One Born Every Minute, so I'd figured to myself that my waters are broken, and that is what I told my midwife. And the only way I can describe it, and if you've actually had your waters break, like they've popped, it literally feels like there is a big balloon in your stomach and it just pops. It just feels like a balloon pops inside your stomach. That is exactly what it felt like, and it felt exactly the same when my waters broke with Avery as well. It is a really distinctive feeling. So the midwife checked me again. My waters had gone and I was around 6 centimetres at this point, and I think we were around maybe 2 in the morning. So my labour had progressed, and the midwife then asked if I wanted to go into the kind of main room and use the pool. So I said yes. So we walked round, and I'm not gonna lie, after my waters broke, the pain became really unbearable. So we got into this room, and the big tub was there, and there was a massive spider in it. So the midwife needed to sort that out for me before I would get in. So they started running the bath, and I just felt this insane pressure, like I really needed to go for a poo. And there was this little toilet inside the birthing room, and do you know what's really weird is I was so out of it at this point. I had been given gas and air, and it kind of just makes you feel like bathroom drunk, so I was a little bit out of it. And I can't remember if this is actually how it was, like there was literally like a little bathroom stall within the labour room, or if that's just how I'm remembering it, because I was so out of it. But I went to the toilet, It was bad, guys. I went to the toilet, but I can remember feeling really uncomfortable because I was so exposed, because it was still within the same room. But I don't know if that was actually true or if that's just how my mind remembers it, because I was so out of it. Either way, I felt really, really uncomfortable, and at this point, even between contractions, I was feeling really, really uncomfortable. So the second I came out of the toilet, I just said, look, I can't do this, I need an epidural, I can't do it anymore. So an ambulance was called then. My mum couldn't have driven me to the hospital because I was so far along in labour. Because I'd been given gas and air and pethidine, I had to be transferred by ambulance, and my mum wasn't actually able to come into the ambulance with me, so she drove in her car behind the ambulance. So they got me in the ambulance. Honestly, this bit was kind of a blur. I remember the voice of the paramedic that was sat next to me. And I also remember that at some point during that ambulance journey, I felt like I really needed to push, and I just knew, I was laying there in that ambulance and I just knew, I am not going to get this epidural, he's coming now. So once we got to the hospital, I still had the gas and air at this point. They wheeled me in on this gurney, and I remember going into the labour ward, and I can remember seeing, I don't know if it was an anaesthetist or if it was a midwife, but I remember someone standing in front of the door to the room I was going in, and they were holding like a clear IV fluid bag, and I thought that that must be my epidural. But we got into the room, they put me on the bed, and I think just from the noises I was making, they felt the need to check me before they went any further, and they did, and lo and behold, I was fully dilated, which was exactly what I thought. So there was no time for epidural. I had made the journey from the birth centre all the way to the hospital for no reason whatsoever. I should have just stayed there in hindsight, but at that point I just felt like I couldn't take the pain anymore. But I didn't have a choice at this point. I had to push with no more pain relief, so I did. I think that very final stage of labour, where the contractions are so intense and the pressure is so intense, really is a blur. I mean, looking back at all three of my labours, the only time that I can actually recall remembering much of that kind of pushing part and kind of final stage of labour part is with Avery, but I had the epidural, so the pain wasn't really as bad. But I know that it took around 20 minutes, and within 20 minutes Zach was out. During the time that I was pushing, I can recall my mum saying, "Crissie, he's ginger," which was actually really, really funny, because my dad had joked to me the entirety of my pregnancy that my baby was going to be a redhead. I don't know if he had some kind of intuition or what, but yeah, my mum told me that he was redhead before he'd even come out. And then he was born and they put him straight onto my chest. And again, at this point, it was still really, really blurry. I honestly don't know if it's like the gas and air, or if it is just kind of the trauma your body goes through like during labour and pushing a baby out that makes your memory so foggy over that point. Whether it's your mind's way of blocking out the pain so that you'll have more in the future, I don't know. But it really felt really, really fuzzy, like I can only pick up snippets of that part. But Zach was born and he was gorgeous and he was perfect. I remember not long after he was born, my dad actually came into the hospital to see me. He was on his way to work. I think this must have been at around 6 AM. Zach was born at 5:34 AM, and I had started timing my contractions at about 6:30 the day before. So my labour was roughly around 23 to 24 hours, but my dad was on his way to work, so he came into the hospital to see me and to meet Zach before he went off to work. So that was really, really lovely, and we just had a few kind of nice settled hours in the labour room. We had tea and toast, which I feel like is a rite of passage. If you give birth in the UK, for some reason the midwives will always offer you tea and toast after you give birth. So we had some tea and toast. I had torn, so I did need stitches, and apparently my temperature was up. Zach was perfect. His APGAR score was brilliant. He weighed 7 pounds 2. He was perfect. There were no issues with Zach whatsoever, other than he was a little bit sleepy, but not to the point where anyone was concerned. Like, he slept a lot. He slept the most compared to any of my babies when they were newborn. That first day I had to wake him up for feeds. But my temperature was up a little bit, so they decided that they wanted to send me down to the ward just for observations. Normally in the UK you can get discharged pretty quickly after birth, but because my temperature was a little bit elevated, they sent me down to the ward. My mum decided to go home and get some rest at this point, which was probably for the best. So I went for a shower and a wee, and oh my goodness, that first wee after childbirth. It was so painful. But I got dressed into my little nightie, went down to the ward with Zach, and those first few hours were really quiet because Zach was quiet. He slept the whole time. I remember the midwife on the ward came in a few times to help me feed Zach, because I was then learning how to breastfeed, and I was discharged home then at around 4 o'clock in the evening. Out of all 3 of my births, I would definitely say that Zach's felt the hardest to recover from. I don't know if it was just because he was my first. I didn't tear, I don't think, with either of my other 2. I'm not 100% sure if I tore with Eli. I know I definitely didn't tear with Avery, but I did 100% tear with Zach because I needed stitches. And I just remember afterwards, like, I needed to fill a bath to go for a wee in the morning. It felt that sore, and I remember telling my midwife at my 24-hour checkup that I was really scared to go for a number 2 because it was so sore down there that I just didn't want to put any more pressure on it. So the recovery was definitely the hardest with Zach, but in comparison to what I know a lot of people go through, it really wasn't that bad. I think I felt much better after about maybe a week or 2. But looking back, especially for a first baby, that birth was definitely straightforward. It was pretty much textbook. 24 hours is actually probably quite short in comparison to a lot of people's, especially with the first baby. And he was born a day after his due date. I went into labour on my due date, so that was pretty spot on. I feel like I can remember his labour quite well, considering how much time has lapsed, because he was my first. He was the baby that made me a mum. That is something that I think will always stick with me. But that was essentially Zach's birth story. That is 2 out of 3 now, so I will film another little short video like this sharing Eli's birth story as well, and then all 3 of the birth stories are here on YouTube. So I hope you enjoyed hearing that little story time. I will try and fish out some old photos and I will kind of overlay them over this video. If I haven't managed to, then I'm really sorry, but I'll try and dig deep and see if I can find. I know I've got loads, but it's where they are. I mean, some of them might be on my mum's Facebook page from 10 years ago, but I will try and fish out some old photos from when Zach was first born. And I think I might actually have a photo of the beach trip that me and my mum took the day before I went into labour, so I'll see if I can find that one as well and insert it as well. So hopefully they would have been overlaid over this video at some point. But thank you for watching, and I will see you guys in a few days with another video. Bye guys.